Hello everybody, one and all, to one of the worst timed videos I'm doing as part of the backlog series, since Modern Warfare's public profile is really as dead as it could possibly be, but just because it's a bad idea doesn't mean that it's still not on my schedule. Since there have been a few new subscribers coming into the fold as of late, I think this is going to be a good time to remind the new people how these Call of Duty videos work, since it's probably been around a year since I've done one. I've actually done the entire series up until now, don't you know? Even the really bad end-space games that I prefer not to talk about. But anyway, first off, I do want to say that I am not taking this game seriously at all. It's stupidly overblown and full of pointless shock value, so don't take my video on this game as gospel. We're just doing this because it's just kinda stupid and goofy. It's gonna be a fun time for me, so we can just go on and bash a cynical annual series for doing these dumb things and having nothing important to say. And more importantly, I usually only do these videos on the campaign of the Call of Duty game in question, and I know that some people out there say that the campaigns of these games are completely pointless and no one plays them, and personally, you have the right to think that. I just wanted to say that right out of the gate, so that the people who do think that campaigns are bullshit can leave the video, because there's really nothing else I'm gonna say about the game. The main reason why I don't look at the multiplayer mode in shooters is mostly because the quality of those modes can be affected by things that aren't actually in the game, such as the behavior of other people and latency problems, and I just don't think I can give or take away points on a game for things that are affected by factors that aren't in their control, so it just doesn't seem fair. So, with that out of the way, let's crack on with Activision's latest spin on the automatic gold mine. Starting out on the first mission of this game ends up being pretty standard stuff for Call of Duty. Grossly overpowered military character man goes in with a team to infiltrate a place to establish what the ultimate antagonist is going to be. Yeah, the game does have pretty graphics and all the gun textures in the world, but it kinda ends up falling apart when it's being used to render the same locations that we've been going to for the last 7 to 9 Call of Duty games, and the whole Dark Forest thing isn't really doing the graphics superpowers any favors. So, we get to the place and we shoot up some face, and we start getting into the point of why we're actually here in this random spot in the middle of nowhere. Apparently, the villain generator this year came up with terrorist wielding chemical agent. I actually didn't really understand what was going on after that mission was over for a couple of reasons. One, this is Call of Duty, and therefore all of the characters are unnamed and have no character traits, so I don't know who the people are who are directing the plot and are supposed to be pulling the strings. And two, for whatever reason, the game's script repeatedly calls this ultimate WMD that the terrorists are getting, they call it a gas, instead of anything else that would have stood out better in the dialogue. Seriously, after hearing the post-mission report, I literally thought that that mission was to destroy a fuel depot, because I was playing Medal of Honor games around that time, and it's actually really common in military shooters to do that for obvious reasons. I didn't realize until a couple missions later that we were talking about a bombing chemical all that time. What I think happened for this toned down part of the script is probably foreign markets or something else business related, because they wanted something easy that they could censor so that they could fit in better in a different market. Otherwise, it literally makes no sense for something that's supposed to have all this deadly power getting relegated to the same word that we use for gasoline. After that, the game takes you through the typical Call of Duty story structure, where the game grabs one of your main characters and drops them into a hot zone before the shooting starts, which in most shooters makes sense. Why bother showing scenes of nothing happening? But usually in other shooters, it's because all of this different areas and settings are connected to a pre-established conflict or war or person or WMD. In Modern Warfare, these scenes feel all over the place because the antagonist is as badly established as Battlefield 4's, and I don't even know who we're fighting. They probably mentioned him a couple of times, but I completely forgot because that's how Call of Duty works. Because there isn't this solid central villain to wrap the plot around, the middle parts of the game feel like they're only in these settings for shock value, like how one of the early missions is that more famous terrorist bombing and invasion of London. The shock value of this game doesn't even manage to shock, because the game fundamentally lacks that central storyline or characters that we should care about and invest our time into, and ends up defaulting to thinking that the audience is just going to think that this scene is defining and brave just because it involves a car bombing that reflects other car bombing attacks that happen in real life. Without characters, without people with names, the scene feels like it revolves around a bunch of heavily armed crash test dummies, and I could give two shits for what happens to any of these people. It's because, outside of the heavily promoted return of Captain Price, the only recognizable character from the original trilogy, the game's characters are just a bunch of typical Call of Duty stock, who barely bothered to have their names get mentioned half the time. Other than Price, the only other one I could remember was our main character, who ended the game by joining the local Third World Resistance movement because his love interest was leading that charge. Again, couldn't give less of a crap what happened to that slice of white bread. The major issue for why Modern Warfare is such a goofy game in retrospect is because it takes itself so goddamn seriously all the time. Modern Warfare is an edgelord's shooter. It's the video game equivalent of that asshole who's trying to wake up everyone he knows and tells them, "Can you believe it, man? All this violence and terrorism that's happening all over the world, and the media's trying to cover it up. People getting tortured and blown up all the damn time. In the third world, we don't hear about none of that. This is where the terrorists live. They're all around us, and you don't even know. That's why the army has to sneak in and shoot up that apartment building." Modern Warfare tries to throw out these daring scenarios that no other shooter will do at all times, that the game's seriousness about it turns right around to just being a comedy. Mostly because Modern Warfare just shows the scenario and forgets to put in characters. Even Price, I can barely give credit for because he's only in the game to look like a badass and be morally gray about what he's leading you to do, and we never learn anything about his character. He has no character arc. At least with the original Price, I could care more about him because his major scenes showed him acting erratically sometimes because he was in the danger zone behind enemy lines, and he needed things done quickly or else the entire thing was going to blow up in everybody's face. There was actually something to his character and to his behavior, and it was really believable due to what his role was in managing that covert mission. This Price, who in fact is not actually the same Price from the original trilogy, he just looks exactly like him and has the same name due to a huge coincidence. All he does is just talk at you and tells you what to do the entire time. If the player had been able to agree or disagree or just simply respond with something to what he was talking about, then that could have made for some interesting story moments, but in this game, you just have to go along with whatever he says and just hope that he's right that time. Which he is every time, because plot armor. The shooting in the game is as well polished as it ever is, with the same features that you come to expect from COD. You get to shoot through thin cover, leaning into the shots, a bunch of helpful sights, and the patented gimmick vehicle sections. The enemies are a bit erratic in this game and hard to pin down, which means that at the very least, Modern Warfare has good enemy AI that can surprise you sometimes, but other times it's mostly because you're fighting them in an urban setting and can barely tell them apart from the civilians because, shock! That's how real-life terrorism works! The apartment level was actually pretty good since the enemies had scripted scenes, where they'd hide in these weird spots and end up catching you by surprise. The developers actually took the time to write dialogue for the people you were encountering so that the terrorist cells felt realistic, and then applied that good script to the gameplay to make a raid that felt really special and unique from the usual wave-based enemy spawns that the rest of the game goes for. Later on, we meet the military higher-ups who are tracking the intel on the WMD chemical agent, who, in spite of probably being played by well-known actors above the usual voice actors that these games get, they end up adding nothing to the story other than chiding Price for his high-risk tactics. But like other stories that do this character, Price is always in the right in disputes with his bosses because plot armor. They give you your later mission instructions and Price doodles all over them because it's either his way or the highway. I mean, to be fair to Price's decision making, he does save your ass once or twice, and on a couple occasions what he chooses does seem to be in the wrong, but he ends up with him doing good in the end because the ends don't always justify the means. There is some justification to his moral grayness, so it's not as one note as I'm making it seem, okay? And speaking of characters, I did manage to forget one that's actually pretty important. Couldn't imagine how that would happen when talking about a Call of Duty game. Her name is Farah, and she is the resistance leader I mentioned earlier. Her story is actually pretty typical for what her role is. She grew up in the third world that was ravaged by terrorism. She lost her entire family early on and had to struggle her way to the top. The chapters in this game that focus on her do make for the more fun challenges, since it relies more on having to face superior odds using just whatever you can find lying around, like making a silencer out of a tin can, or stabbing an invader with scissors, or escaping prison with just her wits. There are actual restrictions on the combat, which makes for some relatively impressive encounters, mostly because this game doesn't end up being so handholdy and will kill you straight up if you fuck up, forcing you to learn through your failure. Everything else about her is nondescript. I could merely mention her character's role, female resistance soldier leader, and you could just imagine her character arc based on stereotypes, and you'd pretty much be 80% of the way there. I think the developers did a good job creating her character and giving her some good scenes. It's just that what they do with this character has been done 15 times already, and I just forgot she existed. Whoops. The second half of the game falls back to the usual COD standards, ruined cities, facilities, and an outdoor section or two, but not a lot of notable gameplay happens. There is the prison scene I mentioned earlier, but the powerless part is actually pretty short, and you don't really have to do a lot to clever your way out of your cell. There was a section that revolved around directing a stealth section from a camera, which was a cool set piece since the person you were directing had no combat training. The only other thing I could find in the footage was that there was a tunnel that you had to go through that was full of booby traps, which were all well planned at least, if not for being completely annoying as well due to all the tight corridors ending in turrets, sometimes, which is just super fun. Fine, I'll give the game some points for having original combat sections and trying to mix it up a bunch of times, but again, in the COD tradition, level gimmicks that last 10-20 minutes and are never reused anywhere else in the game. And now, as we get into the end game, I can talk about the scene that legitimately pissed me off. The torture scene. My main reason for why this was included is probably because they were trying to ape that Hollywood tradition of reboot callbacks. Call of Duty 4 had a torture scene, therefore the reboot needs one too. And no, I didn't get pissed off at this scenario because it's disgusting. I got ticked off with it because it was Price's idea to begin with, and he ultimately didn't give you a choice on how to go through with it, which is kind of fucked up when you are the goddamn player character. And there's no two ways about this. Price is conducting a gross and probably illegal torture party that is actually hard to watch, since Price is threatening a terrorist father with his wife and kid in the same room. At this point, the scene has been going on for probably 3 to 5 minutes, so I ended up just saying fuck it and wanted to start being as unreasonable as the game was for putting me into this situation I didn't want to be into. I wanted to punch the dude all the time, but wasn't allowed to. The game then finally gives us some bullets that we can put in our damn threatening gun. that Price has given us so thoughtfully. And this is finally when we get some goddamn choice in this torture scene. We can either try and shoot the hostages, or after we get the information, we can finally choose to shoot him rather than let him go. And that's pretty much it for this entire torture scene. The annoying thing is that the game labels the hostages as innocent civilians. I got pissed off because the game has some sort of moral righteousness over you, but it's the one shoving you into the scenario where you're presented with these options to be a horrible human being. Like, you can't have it both ways, game. That's fucked up. Whatever, we got the info, so now we can start getting to our boring-ass villain. The game actually did have two villains. It's just that they were conducting most of the ops from behind the scenes, so we barely get to see them doing anything, which is why they're boring as a sack of nails. Even though Barkov, as the main villain, is the one who personally chokeholds you, imprisons you, probably stabs you a couple times, and also calls you a slut cunt dick face. The final missions take place in a house, a facility, or dam of some sort, and running up his gray cube of a hideout to Barkov's helicopter, where he gets shot like once or twice in the typical anticlimactic death. You do know that this is a video game, right? We have the ability to have a balls-out crazy encounter where we fight him in an overblown, overpowered jet or a tank or something, right? Why the hell do you cop out with a simple gunning down of the guy threatening to drop death chemicals on America, or whatever the hell his plan was? Ugh, I hate this. The plot's boring anyway. However, the game did end on a bit of a twist for me. It ended on something that legitimately made me laugh. It's the post-ending cutscene where Price sits down with military boss lady, and they suggest forming a task force for anti-terrorism because Barkov had connections to other cells or something really stupid like that. Price thought it was a good idea and had some candidates for the job. And that's when I realized that this game was so full of itself that it thinks it can form the Avengers out of Modern Warfare characters. Like, this stupid reboot has the potential of its own cinematic universe? Obviously, this isn't going to work. There isn't a team of recognizable characters from this series that you can use for some sort of Avengers knockoff. I think it would be hilarious if they put all of their choices together, because it would basically look like they copy-pasted the same person 4 times standing next to each other. Call of Duty characters are all the same person with different names. Naturally good-looking and skilled soldier, white dudes. The only reason Price is in this game was because Captain Price had an epic mustache, and that differentiated him from everyone else. What did Roach have? He died in a gas ditch, and maybe he was wearing a mask with a skull on it. I don't remember Roach. And that is Modern Warfare, a supposed return to form that spent its runtime trying to shock the audience over and over again by saying, "Look, this terrorism happens in real life. It's so realistic. Isn't it all so traumatizing?" And yet completely forgetting that in order to get emotionally invested in a story to react that way, it needs characters, someone to care about, something to know about, something that's an actual threat. Call of Duty fundamentally never puts any stock into its characters, so barely a third of the time do you even leave these campaigns knowing the names of anyone that was involved in it. At least in Black Ops 3, they had you do a boss fight with each of your squad. It definitely had some good graphics and some neat set pieces, Modern Warfare, where they mixed up the combat with some limitations and some new rules for you to deal with, and that's peppered throughout the game. But for the most part, it's your standard COD runny, gunny cover shooting in the same old places with the same old guns. Surprisingly, the 17th Call of Duty game didn't do anything out of the ordinary or above expectations. I suppose the fans at least got Warzone, which they think is really good, but I guess we'll have to wait for Call of Duty Cold War before we get another chance for Call of Duty to do something as interesting as what Black Ops 3 managed to make out of its mind. I'll put up my final scoreboard for the video. and wish you all out there a victory for gamers. Thanks for coming out to my favorite place, the easy target range. And then when I finally did get the ultimate choice, I pulled the trigger on the guy. And the pistol clicked. It's because Price, in all his wisdom, gave me a gun with no bullets because he wanted to call all of the shots on how this would go down. It's because he didn't trust me to do it his way, but he still told me to act that way. Like you've been putting me in this disgusting scene and forcing me to watch it all play out, but when you give me that chance to go all the way and finish it gun blazing, you have the nerve to start calling me unreasonable? Fuck off, Price. After that, I tried shooting Price a few times just to show him that I hated that call he made.